Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH3022 Social Media Practice, and this is the overview video summary of the topics that we'll be covering in the 14th lecture. It looks like the sun's going to be out today, so I'm not going to be sitting in the office for too long, I hope. I hope I can get out and get some fresh air and get some sunlight. I'm realising I'm beginning to look pale. I think I need to go and sit in a field somewhere, despite however cold it is, to just get some sunlight. Right, okay, the topic of this week's lecture is network smarts and digital affordances, which is a topic that we covered in the first year in relation to the Jones and Hafner books, and the Howard Rheingold NetSmart and the Henry Jenkins, Ford and Green, spreadable media. So it's what are the skills and capabilities and the literacies that we need to consider when both producing and developing content for social media, but also when we're asking people to engage with social media as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down, this idea of modes of literacy, into three or four components. And there's kind of, if you like, what I've called a kind of theological mode of literacies, which is kind of the text is externalized, and that our job is to approach and understand the ideas within a body of knowledge and come up with a kind of reverential way of understanding that, and we accommodate and adopt that. The other way is to a kind of transactional view, which is kind of where we look at the skills and the capabilities, and we can adopt a plan of action that transforms our ability to engage with text in a kind of meaningful way. But then there's another focus, which is the critical pedagogy, the critical learning and approach, which is based on a kind of idea of self-fulfillment, and rather than it just being a series of routines and skills that you learn, or a set of observable practices that you're seen to comply with, but this is something like, if you like, a more humanistic way of looking at media and communication, which is something which is expressed as something of your identity and your social status. It's a social affirmation, which gives us the kind of the right and the empowerment and the sense of entitlement to participate in society. So we want to recognise media as a set of lived experiences and practices related to the sociological turn that we discussed in the first half of this module, when we're looking at the techniques of evaluation, of not necessarily just looking at the text, as important as they are, the products, they're important, but what's more important is the way that people use them and understand them, and how they circulate and spread, and how people make sense of the world through these texts and products and ideas. So we're going to break this down. What I did a while ago, I went through the Jones and Hafner book about digital media literacies, and I broke it down to its core constituent components of each chapter and section. And then I've kind of summarised that to kind of look at this as a kind of a model, if you like, of where we fit within these different practices and what we can expect as a kind of set of criteria, if you like, that will help us to develop a more engaged, more participative, richer, more deeply founded engagement with our media. So it's this idea of kind of focusing, shifting away from, if you like, spectatorship and consumption-based forms of media to practice-based forms of media. You are what you produce. You are what you make. That's the shift that we're taking. And it's kind of, there's a book by David Gauntlet, and I'm not sure if I quote him, but it's relevant, is that, the making is connecting argument is that it's better to do something because it gives you a direct feeling of engagement with the social process, with other people. Knitting, writing letters, rather than just relying on electronic production itself. But you can learn a lot about the electronic production by contrasting it with other forms of production. Making your own mixtapes, going back and reverting to a kind of an analog form of communication tells us a lot about the way that we shift our attention when we go onto digital platforms. So we're thinking about what the kind of tools and skills are and the capabilities of, kind of how one of the things we do with media is we backfill our media. So we apply our knowledge of the past. The rear view mirror analogy is that we're driving forward whilst only being able to see in the rear view mirror. And so we can only make sense of the future in terms of the things that we know about and have established in the past. And I think that's crucially important because as Richard Rorty talks about, our hopes and fears for the future are based on our experience from the past, and that's a challenge to break free from some of our fears and to move forward in some circumstances. So it asks the question, these kind of new literacies are really focused about the idea of transformation, about the idea of kind of looking at the different models of literacy and asking the question, on what joins these together, what links them, what separates them, what divides them, being critical about them and asking the question, separating out what is the cause from the effect. Because what we generally tend to do, we apply an ad hoc, post hoc rationalisation to things, and we see the effect, and we assume that there were a set of causes. And I think we've demonstrated this with the sugar debate, and which is why it's so important that we look at this as an issue, because we see a rise in obesity in our societies, a rise in diabetes, a rise in heart disease, and the assumption is that is the result of certain types of social practices: greed, gluttony, sloth, kind of a lack of self-control and self-discipline. And all you need to do to change those things is to become active and exercise more and self-disciplined and kind of get the fat, get out my body, all that kind of stuff. Whereas in actual fact, it's built into the system, and people are being exploited because the economic system drives profit from selling people cheap, inexpensive, long-lasting, high-carbohydrate food, which predominantly makes people ill, because the mechanism is not a mechanism that is good for not everybody, but for most people's physiology. And so it's separating out the cause from the effect. And that applies in the way that we think about media as well. So what we've got to do is look at media as a kind of media skills, media literacies as a kind of set of practices. So that means that if they're practices, then people have to think about how they participate. And there's a kind of, is there a circularity? Does this go round in a circle? And maybe the traditional model of media practice and media literacies does that. It kind of rotates around kind of certain ideas. But we need to question that and step back from it. So one of the big focuses on media literacies is the idea of employability. But what makes somebody employable, depends on the type of job that they're going into. And if you're expected to think and to critically evaluate situations, then following just a set of routines is not what is suitable. And yet that's what organisations call for, that you just follow the patterns and the kind of the tram lines, if you like, that have been established already, and you're not expected to think outside those tram lines. So this brings us to thinking about we'll look at Bloom's taxonomy in this, and that kind of hierarchy of thinking skills, and where it brings us in terms of kind of establishing Maslow's hierarchy of needs might be useful to look at as well. I'll add that to the notes, actually. That's a good thought. And but this brings us in a way to kind of, it's not necessarily about the concepts and the ideas. What it's actually about is the social roles that we play. So we'll identify some of our expectations about literacy practices in terms of social roles: the learner, the teacher, the manager, the employee, and those kind of divisions between people as a set of, if you like, functional literacies that enable you to play that role. What is it that enables you to be a creative social media producer? What is it that tells people that's the role that you play, so that it's socially acceptable? So there's a kind of proliferation of literacies. It's kind of, we need lots of different types of literacies in order to be able to survive and prosper. Emotional literacy, visual literacy, linguistic literacy, technical literacy, peer group literacy. There's a lot, but I think what defines and connects these things is a sense of reflection. So reflexivity is one of the keys, or one of the ways it's not the only one, but it's one of the ways to think. So we look at our established practice and we ask questions about it. Right, okay, I've talked a lot today. The notes are available on the DMU Commons wiki. Just go to wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk and check out the TECH3022 section, page, and look for the lecture notes section. You can also carry on the conversation, share some examples by going to talk.our.dmu.ac.uk, and I'm always posting examples of different types of media. Anything I see, radio programs, that kind of thing, I post them up there and I put the links on the wiki as well. So it'll be good to see some conversation and discussion on the DMU Talk platform as well. But I'll see you at the lecture on Monday.